line. Anyway.
Yeah.
All right, we'll do room tone.
Linux.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Why We Roll, the tabletop role-playing game chat show slash live stream from the Stillfleet studio. As ever, I am one of your hosts, Chris Pickett, and I am joined by my good friend, co-host, and comrade in arms. I don't know. something. What's up? Hey, Wythe Marschall's here.
Hey, what up? It's me. Yeah. Technically, we're not doing the arms part yet
No,
for
no,
the
no,
spy
no.
agencies listening, but yes, comrades, otherwise, for sure. Very excited to be back,
like
Chris.
locked
with
arm
friends.
in arm. You know what I mean?
That's right. Those
like,
arms, human arms.
Yeah,
Yeah,
human arms,
yeah.
like a hug across the world.
Totally normal human arms, which we
Totally
have.
normal human
That's
arms.
what communism means in Latin is hug across the world. That's literally, yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, anyway, tonight we are very excited. We are joined by our good friend Ethan Gouldini, here to talk about, well, here again, really, to talk some more about the Sometimes Kingdom, some new developments, some new projects, some new products, even. So, yeah, what's up, Ethan? How you doing tonight?
Hi. Doing all right. The heat dome here has broken somewhat. It's raining, and so
Good.
my spine is finally back to human state again. So we're doing great.
Nice. Yeah, I was looking before we jumped on. I was looking at the weather here down in sweet, lovely central North Texas, where it is currently 102 degrees with a heat index of 115 degrees.
Oh,
So
pish tush.
we're doing great.
Yeah.
Just made up numbers. Super El Nino.
Yeah, those are
ass-
numbers don't go up past 100. What are you talking about? It's like the Y2K of weather. We don't numbers aren't weather's
We
not
have
supposed to go
talked
past 99. It crashes.
multiple times on the show about whether infinity is real. So
That's
this
true.
is, we're about to find out when at least is 115 real in Fahrenheit.
Stupid
What's up,
speaking-
thermodynamics.
You know, speaking of weather, speaking of seasons, seasonality.
What nice segue.
What a segue.
Tight.
What
Yeah.
a segue. Ethan, maybe just really briefly for folks who have not listened to your previous episode with us here on Why We Roll, could you tell us about your project, The Sometimes Kingdom?
Sure. The Sometimes Kingdom RPG is a fantasy setting using the grit system that also introduces a new mechanic called the Tables of Magic. The setting is we sort of started calling it a high fantasy, low status setting, where everybody essentially is a magician due to a disaster that happened a long time ago. All the members of the Rye and Weatherly realm of Season's Keep, the secret sister world to Earth, are able to use magic, and over the centuries, it has been slowly organized into the seasonal tables of magic. The realm itself, Season's Keep, is divided into four major islands, each one sort of containing a season in it. Once upon a time, all the seasons rotated about a great intangible axle, but due to said disaster, they all stopped. Conveniently, one per island. So now there is the island of Springside, Summerside, and together they make the Greens. And then there's wispy, windy Copia, the Autumn Island, and then cold and craggy Interheart. And each one gets their own table of magic with an increasing series of steps where you can do increasingly high magic. However, all the adventurers outside of impending apocalypse are taken care of by the Questing Network, which is an overworked nonprofit which pairs would-be adventurers with necessary quests for the common good. So while you're on those quests, you have to essentially craft and forge spells on the fly using powerful word magic. And do all the things that adventurers do. Fight sentient buildings, deal with puppet kings. Travel on boats, take cars to dangerous diners, that sort of thing. I should also mention that the game takes place in the late 20th century. That's sort of an important fact. It's a post-medieval society, which is now for the first time wrangling with modernity as its connections to Earth, for some reason, seem to be increasing beyond the usual, wardrobe or secret portal or whatnot.
And it's building on games we've been playing and developing rules for, but it has some unique rules. And I think you get a sense from Ethan's description. The game is very much driven by Ethan, your like long-term world building. It's kind of your like fantasy world you've been building up, writing about, making art about, and we've been trying to kind of think through what are some good ways to turn that into an RPG. Is that fair to say?
That's totally fair to say. I think the earlier versions of it used something closer to a tag system for Magic. And as we were doing the earliest playtest through it, I mean, at this point, even we were doing a live play for the Questing Network. And based on player feedback, we started realizing that it just wasn't, we kept talking about high magic and it didn't quite feel high magic-y enough. So we introduced this system of word magic, which sort of created this very robust mechanic for being able to rationally kind of do whatever you want in a way that still felt like it had boundaries and rules attached to it. And there were general stakes involved, so it didn't instantly turn into wish magic. Or the every fantasy game's highest level of magic is press button, do what you want.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the idea behind this also was that because the things like instant, like the high stakes against the gods sort of apocalypse stuff that you would typically see at the end stage of a D&D campaign are already taken care of by a group of extremely terrifying magicians called the Defenders of the Realm. So you're stuck doing literally every single other thing in the world and being paid a pathetically small amount of money for it as a fantasy adventuring freelancer.
Well, this sounds eerily familiar. I mean, this is a strange fantasy concept I've never thought about.
Yeah, Chris. Every game is Thrall. It turns out.
It turns out, yeah.
Everything is Thrall.
Everything is just Thrall. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
No, but it's true that the games all focus on labor, but in different ways. So I think it's interesting how each of us, with medieval pilgrimages, very different from you're a space marine but trying to quit, very different from fucked up little guys after humanity rediscovering humanity in a kind of Lord of the Flies, like, oh, now we can use tools, let's shoot each other with nail guns or whatever. And then Ethan, your take has been different again, where you've kind of posited like adventurers are kind of like people who do gigs, right? They get calls, they go out to deliver stuff, but what they deliver is like swords and magic. But actually, if there were really geopolitical level problems, there would be mighty wizards in any high fantasy realm who would just do all that shit, and they would actually be kind of the scariest people. So I think it's interesting how that's in the background. To me, it's like not like the Defenders of the Realm conceit is not huge in at least the first scene and the stuff we've been working on, but it's interesting how that contours, right, like who you are as a character, because you're not that you couldn't become high level, you can, there's rules for that, but it's just sort of assumed you're like, yeah, you're a low-paid gig adventurer, which is a fun way to describe a D&D environment.
Yeah, sure. And it's I think part of it is that it's sort of left up to individual players whether they style themselves as heroes or as people who are doing the job that they're good at, or they're doing it for vocational training. There's even rules for that. Why are you doing what? Yeah, the Questing Network itself is doing it to stop the realm from falling apart at the seams, because magic and technology aren't playing well with each other. As connections with Earth increase, there's sort of an interest, and it's set originally it was sort of set in a vague late 20th century sort of time period. As sort of players started really digging into it, it started becoming increasingly like, oh, I think we need to actually start the timeline. Like, and sort of, I think as a series of zines or as like sort of the arc of the project, it's starting to realize it really starts literally in the late 70s. It starts around 1978, which is sort of a weird time period to start a post-medieval fantasy game in. But it's sort of like it's tracking it all the way back in terms of like, speaking of labor and economics, it's really the start of like when the sort of political project on Earth here that started up like neoliberalism, like really got off like as a world project to control people started. And so what would a bunch of city states in a weatherly realm that doesn't even have nations think about the economics, which suddenly lets them control everybody? They'd probably really like it a lot. There probably are going to be a lot of societal tensions based on that. So starting it at that time period, especially when that's when electronics really start taking off at a level that don't take up an entire room. That's probably if people are smuggling stuff like automobiles and enchanting them, and you've got living cars, and you've got records and all this other sort of simple, in quotes today we would consider simple but like durable technology. Suddenly you're having things like hard drives being smuggled over, and magic is going berserk for it.
I was going to say, I mean, like consumer grade electronics. I was telling Wythe and Ethan before we came on that my entire day was eaten up by struggling with consumer grade electronics and technology. But like, I don't know, just even imagining like an Atari in a fantasy, like an original
Nightmare
Atari fantasy
scenario.
setting is amazing. Um, I do want to pull us back a little bit. We keep on mentioning zines.
Yes, yes.
Can you tell us why do we keep mentioning zines? What's going on with that?
So the original sort of first product that we released was an early access edition called Skier, the sometimes Kingdom Early Access Edition. In
Oh.
sort of in sort of going through all the rules again with a fine tooth comb and continuing to play on the Discord and with other people and with campaigns in person. Um, the sort of like the lore and the rules themselves started to feel a little bit sprawling. And starting to think about like what would be a real sort of rational way to start introducing them, in a way that like I kind of wanted a rule book that felt playable as you're like a learn by play, but like the whole thing is a learn by play. So we increasingly started talking about as we moved over to A5. I think also while we were working on Danse Macabre, which is I think the first official A5 product. I find A5
Yes,
size to be incredibly charming. I just
I
love it.
do too. I do too. I
It's
love
so
them. They're just
wonderful.
little
Yeah.
guys. I love them.
It's this little guy. Look at this little guy. He's so charming. It's so accessible. And I think the zineness of it kind of like busted it up a little bit in the sense of like, okay, well, let's sort of think about this. It's organized. They've organized their world into spring, summer, autumn, and winter. So we're going to need a first one that sort of introduces the core rules. And so that eventually became the this newest print product of the Sometimes Kingdom Monsoon, which doesn't have a season itself. It sort of created a new location on the map called the Island of No Seasons, where you're on a quest to recover a secretive magic item. The current campaign arc in the game is that several of the islands are fighting a pitched sort of. It's starting as a political battle and it's clearly turning into a real war with a new person on the scene named the King of Things, and he is sort of essentially enthralling and conscripting talking objects to himself. And he may or may not be a real person. It's left, but he's a very, very powerful magician in the classic sense. And you are sent off to this island of no seasons, which is sort of like a political no man's land to try and recover this object. And that is the first quest at the back of the zine. So it's your first chance to play all the rules that you just learned. As the zine series is going to go on, there's going to be one for each of the seasons and then beyond. And in the back of it will be another section of this continuing quest. So it's sort of trying to like have a cake and eat it too situation where you're going to be introduced to new species and new rules and new maps and new places to go and things to do, and then there'll be this continuing quest about this one thing, which is going to sort of bind all of the zines, at least in the first round of the series, together.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that there is a narrative through line throughout each of one of them, so that you can have this kind of like slow drip, both like telling the story that you want to tell, and also like having it not just be confined to one document. That's always kind of the hard thing, I think, with like starter or introductory quests or ventures or pilgrimages or whatever you want to call it, where it's like it always feels like such a short amount of space, and you want to expand a little bit more. And I think this is a very eloquent way of doing that.
Yes, but like the zine format is a real space challenge, and honestly, it's been really positive overall. Because
Yeah.
for once we can finally truncate a little bit and start being, I would always use the word efficient, but sort of start marrying lore and mechanics together in a way that hopefully I think people will find very kind of crunchy and satisfying.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
I think we haven't done as much as we could up to now with trying to make the lore always mechanicalized and have the mechanics always have points of reference, and it's different in different games, right? So like in Danse Macabre, we're trying not to be too much into the history, and I think again, I would say in parallel, we did that with Danse Macabre, Chris, where there are a lot of mechanics that the way they're named, there's references to kind of medieval life. Without requiring the reader to like stop and read a textbook, or even like you can ignore these sort of gray passages that talk about like, oh,
Right.
here's a little half column on medieval medicine or something. Like you don't need to read those to play the game. And I think with Sometimes Kingdom, it was interesting because, Ethan, you have so much like drawn, and you also had a lot written already, which was interesting. And with Skier, yeah, with the first version of the rulebook, we developed even more kind of pages of information, but it wasn't all clear how you would use that as a GM, I think. So with the Zine series, so this is the first one, Monsoon, it really was trying to take the best parts of what you had and make it all actionable. So every single spread is like, where you are, why this spread exists. They're all unique, and I think credit here as well, in addition to the art and the writing, which is your lead, Ethan. Credit to Tony Grasso, who laid it out, to just kind of clarifying like okay, like when we're looking at a table, okay, that all fits on one page. And yeah, with A5, it is smaller than letter for sure. And I do think it sort of forced us to talk a lot about like, all right, well, what goes in Zine 1 versus Zine 2 or 3 or whatever. There's no theoretical ceiling, but for now we're just focused on like 1 or 2 at a time,
Yeah.
And I think that already is useful. And then at the level of, as you're saying, like every spread, okay, what is the utility for the GM or the player for the spread? They're really basic questions that probably we should bring to literally everything. I think we think of it a little differently when the book's going to be 100, 200 pages long.
Right.
Know that and like letter size, some pages are just like, oh, well, that's like a little microfiction, that's full art, whatever. And I think with a zine, any zine of any size, it could be A6, it could be, maybe it is like a magazine, it's like shorter but bigger format, but still, like, you just have less room and you have to kind of do different math around, like, I want cool art, I also want rules, I also do want to have this weird, like, in-game poetry at the beginning, whatever it is. So I think it came out well, and I'm really looking forward, honestly, and we can talk a little about this, to what you want to do next. I know you're working, we've already started working, but I know you've put a bunch more time into the second one, and I think it'll be interesting to see how this process changes almost on purpose every time, so that it's not like one formula. Like, this is really meant to be summarized rules for the game, and then all of the other zines will be much more focused on like pretty specific scenarios. But as you're saying, there are through lines. There's a through line to all of them that connects all of them, and they all build. So they always add some core rules and just new sort of core things, so that none of them are like, only for GMs or just an adventure. They're all sort of like a weird, kind of like Kalamandala, actually, Chris. It made me think of that conversation as well. Like, things were inspired by,
I was just thinking about Kalamandala, which, if you're listening to this and you haven't heard our episode with Monkow, I implore you to go back and listen. It's brilliant. Monkow's great. I think, Ethan, you and Monkow kind of share some ideas around how fantasy should be presented and kind of thought through, and these kind of like more rhizomic releases instead of hierarchical releases. But it also reminds me, of course, Wythe, you and I have talked a lot about like Vaults of Varn and how we really like the way that was released, and this very kind of like smart, again, it's succinct. It has to be succinct because you just have so little space, especially in an A5 zine, like you were saying, Ethan. And yeah, it makes that slow drip really satisfying, and it's like fun to collect. It's like there's a bunch of different layers to it that I really I'm really excited about for this line, honestly.
In terms of, also, I think one of the advantages is so having quests that are separate but connected. I mean, for me, just in terms of like, and it's partly an accessibility issue, but it's also just, honestly, I think, like, good information presenting, where if the next scene is going to be bringing up spring, it's going to be the spring scene. So everything that you sort of like pour through and like you're looking through it, maybe you're looking through rules, or you just want to learn about the setting itself, find out about a little, being the new species, the Fae. What that's all about, and then immediately you can put it to use by having the encounters are already included in the book, and you can play the quest, which is right there for that, and it will be a spring quest. So sort of like pairing both the things that you're using and sort of like taking an open-ended view of like why people are looking at it. But if they do immediately want to jump into an adventure or quest, like there's one is set in that world immediately, like following all the stuff you just learned, and that'll just be like happening over and over again. And to White's point, I think it is sort of like, at least to a certain extent, like I think it's sort of the interesting opportunity to try and find like a sensible design language that carries across the whole series, while also offering enough play that it can kind of reinvent itself each time. Like the spring one will hopefully feel a little bit different visually. Than the intro book has to be clear as crystal because it's all the presenting rules. And then the second one, like the spring one, might have a slightly different feel or tone to it. The winter one will definitely be off the rails in comparison to the rest one, because it's certainly the most out there island in terms of like the differences in culture. So stuff like that, I think, will hopefully be fun to do, and I think people will dig it and get it once they see it.
And I think like I also think it'll be fun to not know in advance and not plan the way that we've typically planned games, because we've been working across kind of this theory of like, if you build, they will come a little bit, which is a somewhat different approach than to Chris, especially Vaults of Varn, and that some of the other OSR products we've liked, like Electrum Archive. I feel like we mentioned on the show just things that you and I happen to have read and thought were successful in building over time an audience. I know I have not read as much, but like I know Karen does this a lot too. Like there's been a lot of community stuff. We talked with Josh Demansky about liminal horror, which I've read more of, and I do think it's still a dream that you would have more people creating. As I'm seeing it come together, speaking for myself, and I'm curious what both of y'all think, but more fantasy material, high fantasy material, because that's such the big genre. Regardless of my thoughts on it, and I do play it sometimes, but it feels like I think a lot about sci-fi and like, okay, but 70% of people or whatever still focus on fantasy. Well, let's create lots of material for that. And I think, Ethan, your world is one rich, vivid one to explore, and that's one way to do it. Obviously, we have like, okay, Danse Macabre is like now a fully baked, set of books. You can actually still, you can pre-order whatever.
You can.
And we're fulfilling. And, there's other games as well. So I think it's interesting to think about that relationship of your ideas evolving over time, and then you're playing with other people, and hopefully players and GMs come up with their own cool ideas, which are probably always a little bit different. And ultimately, the goal is to have them in conversation, in part because that's cool and fun, and also because from a pure like game design perspective, I think it will push things forward. And we really admire like Spencer Campbell as well, and you see a lot of, I think his stuff has gotten better in conversation with playtest communities and player feedback. And I think he's been able to refine and look at like what, not his peak form, but based on, what he's published and reading his blog or whatever. It's like, it seems like there's certain elements of his fantasy world that he pulls through in different games and is able to kind of test those with people. So I think, Ethan, it'll be cool to see to some degree, like what islands and what unique rules, or maybe the art can be very different. I mean, again, we haven't done it yet. So I think we're currently just showing off like the sort of best of that has, I think, probably a more clean approach because it's a rule book and it is a product, and more people coming in and saying, let's, condense, let's publish the rules in a really nice little guy. But I think doing some weirder zines that are truly like Ethan go nuts on this island, I think that'll be kind of collectible or fun or something I want to see for a different reason, because it won't necessarily be as sort of cleaned up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's sort of trying to like make the balance of like accessible typography and clear readability, but also sort of really kind of also like upholding the spirit of zininess, if we're calling it that. It kind of needs like to be a little bit freer in some ways. So I think that is going to be a cool opportunity. I think it's sort of also as a world, it's sort of funny because in my mind, it's like, oh, well, this is something it's an idea I've been working on for a long time, but sharing with other people and then they get to play it. Like, I think that like there's going to deliberately be a lot of blank spots on the map, so to speak, because it is a fantasy setting and people have so much energy around that sort of thing. I think the real sort of challenge to kind of like hammer home in world building, aside from just like, base level veto marketing differentiation, is sort of like the reason that it's set where it's set and the way that it's set up the way that it is to sort of like deal with some of the like discrepancies that happen with like thought around a lot of fantasy these days. Winds up just sort of like it is sort of modern life with a fantasy twist. And so I think that that's partly just because it's funny, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But there is that sort of very literal-minded part of me that is always just like, well, they wouldn't have that. Like, that's not how money works. Like, economically, their system must be totally different.
That's
so part
why
of the
I
reason
wrote
it's
Danse Macabre.
yes, thank you. Yes, God. And it's just like so if they have modern ways of speech in any way, shape, or form, and they have currency in some semblance of like, they're not totally disconnected from Earth unless it's just a totally alternate reality where it's just a coincidence.
Yeah.
I thought it wound up being much more interesting to have both of those ideas in tension, where there are some factions that are actively fighting modernity and trying to define what it is, and some that are wholly embracing it because they don't even know what kind of magic they'll create out of techniques.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. I just had a random thought, which I think a lot, saying, Ethan, like how high fantasy is treated as kind of like, it's what do I want to say? It's a facade over like modern ideas, and especially I think over contemporary like late stage capitalism specifically, right? Like when we're talking about economies, when we're talking about how people relate to each other, all this kind of stuff, it's just kind of usually shoved in that. You see that with Freerin, you see that with Game of Thrones, you see that with a lot of the like cozy fantasy stuff that's very popular right now. And yeah, I don't know, there's a part of me that has also just like kind of rejected that and been like, no, it should be fantasy, it should be weirder. We got to get way weirder with this.
Um, and I
like
think
Michael
trying to,
Moorcock weird, like
yes, Michael Moorcock weird, and also just trying to do kind of the one-two punch of making fantasy weirder. And I think in that way, sort of even in the bizarre other world that is the 20th century at this point. Going back to that and sort of trying to re-weirdify life on Earth, because there's a lot of stuff we take for granted unless you start digging, and digging is hard and it's annoying. And the internet is shit now, which doesn't make it any easier. It's trying
Yeah.
to sort of understand how fundamentally weird life is on Earth by having fantasy characters encounter it, and oftentimes it can be played for laughs. But then also there was one session that we did a couple of months ago, where the players wound up in Manhattan. There was it was a whole complicated plot with the Voynich manuscript, and a museum was eating people. Um, but the players started talking about traffic lights and the grid of the streets. It is not that was sort of regulated. They were talking about the buildings or the technology. They were they had their characters become obsessed with the grid of the streets, because the grid is what, an invention from the 1700s, 1800s. It's relatively new. I
yeah,
think
I mean
it's
the Jeffersonian grid and
Yeah.
agricultural kind of land management definitely started, 1700s for sure.
Yeah, late 1700s, and then it
um
really is New York. It's the 1830s when the grid becomes the thing. It goes back to Rome and Vitruvius, but it was really
Yeah,
a
yeah.
neoclassical revival, which New York viewed, and it was crazy at the time. I used to teach the history of New York City, and it was this thing where the corporation, it was literally called the Corporation of New York City, was
Amazing.
we're going to have a grid over this island that is hills and swamps and little streams, and now some of which are canalized, and there's
Yeah.
already little villages that all of which are in the way. If there's already a village, why would you do that? If there's a hill, why would you do that? And they're like, no, we're gonna flatten it and gridify it.
Yep.
And what is annoying about middle capital and the meteoric rise of America as a concept was, the New Rome, was that they did block by block flatten, drain, and gridify a pretty big, long, skinny island, and it was just but why? So there's so many other ways to
Why
do
did
things,
you do
but that example, Rem Koolhaas has a great, but he basically, you go into the idea of complete, they basically were talking about Tron avant la lettre when you read these documents from around 1830, where they were what if the world was just a fucking grid, and over here I could build up this, and over here I could build up that, I could do whatever I wanted, we could buy and
It's
sell
not
the
just a
parcels.
game anymore.
It's not just a game.
It's just like Monopoly.
We do have a question.
Yes, I
in
was
the
about
chat.
to say,
Yeah.
we have a great question in the chat from our good friend Taylor. One thing I love about Sometimes Kingdom is how whimsical it is to read. How did you find the balance between the whimsy of the setting and the more systemy frameworks of TTRPGs?
Love it. I think that the particular kind of whimsy that I've drawn to is a very matter of fact one. I think that I don't know how else to describe it other than it is a plain whimsy. Um, how to sort of describe it? It's um, I think there's certain aspects of whimsy that I adore from British illustration in the 19th century. I think we're all very familiar with that. I think up until very, very recently, whimsy always had a dark edge to it. There was always an unsettling part of it. The forest wasn't perfectly nice. The
Yeah.
gnomes could be eaten by the troll.
Yeah,
It
it's
is
the
really
Grimm's
only with
Tale
the
thing.
yeah, and I think, and to be fair, in the defense of that, there are, I think, certain early age groups where they don't necessarily need to see a horse die in a bog. I don't think, I think that,
Dude,
you,
that's a hot take.
it's a hot take idea, but I think that age starts very young, and I think beyond that, it's you have to start learning about the dark woods in some shape or form. Um, so I think as being an 80s kid as I was growing up with that, there was just I mean, there were no rules to what you could show a child up until that point. And I think so the whimsy that I come to is sort of trying to kind of maybe find a way to kind of synthesize that a little better. It's where because I think ultimately it comes down to certain different kinds of comedy. I think I even talk about it a little bit in the book. Where the sense of humor that I have is a very diasporic one. My family settled in Brooklyn in the early 20th century, after, centuries in the shuttle. So it's that kind of sense of humor is very fatalist to a certain extent. But it is also in direct reaction to life as it is. And I feel like that like the whimsy that comes out of that is a very different kind of whimsy than, sitting by the warm, cozy hearth, which again, I enjoy. But it's not necessarily my sense of humor.
Don't get me wrong. I'll drink a
I love
flagon
a
of
good
ale
pour.
next to a good fireplace.
A pipe of weed with a wizard and some fireworks. I'm all
Yeah.
but
you can't argue.
can't argue with that.
Yeah. But I also
think,
remember, back to what you're saying about the origins of kind of, like I think like Catskill's comedy, like and the idea of shtetl humor and like Russian humor being tied to like, well, we're that way because it be winter 9 months of the year and there's a fucking czar, and like a racism on a scale that is unimaginable by, but it's like that is actually, I think, something that goes right back to what you said, Ethan, about the weirdness of fantasy. Because even I remember back to the observatory days, we had that event on bizarro fiction, and I thought this will be so great. And I read all this just to prep for it, some of these bizarro stories, this emergent new genre that I thought would be similar to the new weird. And it just fell so flat. It was like people trying to be weird without any real, anchor point. Didn't do any of the things that I liked about absurdism, surrealism, the new weird, the old weird, Michael Moorcock, whatever, Lovecraft. It's like the things that I liked about Victor Laval were not present in those bizarro stories because it didn't have any origin in human suffering and just reality. And you can kind of tell, and I think there's something about weirdness in fantasy. Ellen had an interview about this recently about coziness and what's the problem with coziness. It's not like we all hate cute things. I love cats, I love coziness, but when you want to tell stories as a human and get catharsis, there's something dark there. I think that's a good word that I think Alan uses. There's some darkness that you're kind of approaching, and there's many different ways to do that. And I think, Ethan, you do have a particular dry sense of humor and weirdness about it that is all you. But I think any authentic version is coming from some ultimate human suffering of some kind, right? That you're like working through in a story. Otherwise, like all stories would just be like, well, the cat got on the unicorn and they farted rainbows off to the bank and everyone was rich, and there'd be no stakes.
Sold. Greenlit.
Yeah.
That's going to be the next A24 film.
100%. I think that like it is difficult also, and I think we've this is also again in the first zine in Monsoon, and it's something that we've talked a lot on the back end about, is that it's like trying to describe like making queer fiction, and trying to make queer games, and what that means, especially like it can be an abstruse and difficult thing to talk about. I think that there are certain aspects of it, like my sort of adamantness of making a piece of queer fiction was that, like taking the idea that like its categories are unsettled, and like a large part of like dealing with magic and adjudicating what magic spells are and how people are struggling in this world is that it is sort of like it's categorical mania, and they're trying to like solve it, and you can't solve that because categories aren't real life. Well, then you've got magic, which is like, I think there was a line in Owl House where it was like, where knowledge is literally power. If you have a contract that is magically unbreakable, from a la, what was that? The Little Mermaid? The Little Mermaid. What that means for reality is absolutely terrifying. So if it's
this is my other thing about fantasy, man. Like, there's too much wizards. Too many wizards. There's too many wizards.
Well, guess what?
Too many wizards.
It's all wizards. This is double. If you want to be a wizard in Sometimes Kingdom, you've got to be a double wizard.
But you're like low power kind of like, you're a gig worker wizard, which is very different from like the kind of like more traditional, like I would argue, like not really Tolkien-esque, but like the stuff that followed Tolkien-esque, like I think arguably straight out of D&D, where it's like everybody's throwing giant fireballs and everybody can rend reality and become a god and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. It's like, dude, the world would fall apart.
Also, what you just described is the plot of every single episode of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, which is Skeletor, a godlike skeleton wizard from another dimension, shows up, abducts a bunch of good people of Grayskull or whatever, and a shirtless guy with a cool cat and a sword goes out and like does some nonsense, and then 19 minutes, there's 19 minutes of that, and then the denouement as the credits start rolling is like they're all just back at the castle and like, well, that was a strange Tuesday, and there's the stakes are just like the stakes are just that Skeleton Man feels bad. And I think it's very funny to invert that. And Ethan, I will say, because skeletons come up so much in your work, it's like Dia de los Muertos level obsessive skeletons, but which I actually, Chris, you are, as we've covered this before on the show, but we have sort of skeleton pro and anti-skeleton fantasy going on.
I am anti-skeleton fantasy. fantasy. I just want to know the mechanics of how the bones stay together. That's
but
all.
Just to finish the thought, I feel like, Ethan, you treat these people with such loving, like, they are skeleton accountants and they have skeleton bosses they hate, and they're or like, you know, there's like all this level of thought into the fantasy that makes it weird again in a different way from that, like, nom 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 nom, like, I don't know, no one can die, there's magic. So it's sort of like you start with such high level of vitalism and magic that I was like, where could we go from here? But then I get it more dwelling in your head and playing the game and seeing how players react, because I think there's many, to your point, it's like, well, where you go from there is more like real life, in the sense that I don't wake up every day immediately fighting something to the death. Like, yes, I'm worried about the world and die, but I wake up and worry about other things. And I think even if you're
I'm not Duke Nukem. I don't.
Right, exactly.
Like quadruple shotgun.
Duke Nukem references. So good. Oh man, that would be funny. Running Duke Nukem in Sometimes Kingdom. Like,
yes, and anything. No. I think also, like, in terms of the structure of the world, and like because like it is a late 20th century setting, and so I think that at this point, like, not only like, and we've talked a lot about like maybe like the how to incorporate this idea more into the actual world setting, is that there is sort of a parallel between fantasy on Earth, or like life on Earth, and this place. It's not just like another planet that you were visiting. There is a sort of eerie sort of mirroring or parallel that's happening, even though there's travel, small amount of travel, but there is travel between the two worlds. In sort of like how do you? I had a good thought and then I started trailing off. It's okay. What ADHD? What were we just talking about?
Well, I
definitely not this Duke Nukem.
No. Actually, Duke Nukem, no. So in addition to sort of trying to work in more the sort of eerie, unsettling sort of like, you know, mirroring between Earth and the fantasy world, so they're a little bit self-conscious about like being exposed to ideas of fantasy. Like, you know, we're not fiction, we're real. That said, have you seen this like stupid book by Michael Moorcock? That's pretty cool. Why don't we start making swords that are obsidian glass and talk to us and murmur in our sleep? That'd be dope. Let's do that. But beyond that, this idea that like the genre might become more unsettled the farther out from, like, you know, society that you get, because like the sort of main big change pitch of the Sometimes Kingdom, I think, aside from the high fantasy low status idea and the ability to create cool word magic, you know, is that you live in a society, which means that it's the frustration of being bounded by rules. This, you know, it's the same sort of thing where it's like, well, when the cops aren't around, everything is legal, so we can do things if we want to. But, you know, when you're in a city, like, you have to find, if you need to like break the law, you have to find a way around it. And if you're part of the questing network, then you have to have some vague sort of system of ethics. Otherwise, you wouldn't have joined it in the first place. But getting farther and farther out from populated areas, like, the genre might start shifting a little bit. It might be getting just a tiny bit more dark fantasy, you know, which, you know, if you've got wild magic, you've got wild ecologies, which you just got it. You just gotta. And those wild ecologies might be completely inhospitable to human life, and unkillable, utterly unkillable. So you sort of trying to have a little bit of the cake and also the eating of the cake at the same time. That there might be this sort of like, you know, this sort of a bit more stylized breakdown as you get into the dark woods, and then there's no sunlight, and then you're facing monstrosities. And why did you go there? Nobody told you to go there.
I feel like that's I'm trying to remember all the names of the islands. I know Copia, Winterheart.
Interheart.
Interheart,
Copia, Springside, and Summerside.
I mean, Interheart has that really built into it, and that's even in just the first, in Monsoon, in the zine, where you lay it out, where like Interheart is kind of the most dangerous, kind of the swingiest, kind of the weirdest spot.
Yeah, they're the jazziest place.
Yeah, they're jazzy.
You know, yeah, no, the undead feels the most comfortable there. It's like it's occult cities all the way down in this forever winter world. And again, from like it was set up that way specifically because it's like, well, if you've got the undead, where are they going to rot the least fast? It's going to be winter. Like, where is everything dead already? Great. Where's the dead magic? It's going to be the place that's winter. So
I'm curious, Ethan. Like, have you? I mean, just, you know, Riffin kind of has brought this to mind. for those like more wild spaces, have you thought about like what does the frontier of the Sometimes Kingdom look like? Like are there other islands that we're going to explore or see eventually, or what's the
so
thinking?
there, like it's sort of like the whether the Seasons Keep is even on a planet or not is left deliberately vague because it's not important to you. That space TBD. Like the larger cosmos is unnecessary at the moment, therefore shan't be explored. But in
Yes.
terms of the frontier, it's interesting because this came up recently in a game, and I sort of spat something out. Wythe and I, we're just talking about this, where it was this idea. Well, it's like, well, if monstrosities are attacking cities, why don't they just fortify themselves already? And it was sort of, and I said something offhand along the lines of like, oh no, the Fae will definitely not allow that. That's the only reason that humans are allowed to have cities. So it spiraled out into this like that lore came out of nowhere, where okay, so you've got like the former antagonists of humankind, like, and humans all jostle for space and live together essentially in peaceable nature in this fantasy world. So you've got giants and skeletons and the Fae and fairies. And I should mention that like these are all antagonists from a very specific line of like Arthurian stuff that came out of a very specific region at a specific time. And I'm just obsessed with it because it's so anime. It's like they were writing anime back in like the 12th and 13th centuries, and it's so beautiful. It's so poetic. Like all
the
that
original
I just
anime
can't get
is
enough of
just
that. I can't get
Arthuriana.
enough of that. Like, yeah, 100%. I can't get enough of that like Middle English stuff. So like within that context, it's sort of like that's where some of the species come from specifically. But the former antagonists from other games are now essentially like you all pay taxes and you all have a job and it sucks. Can't we go back to just fighting each other in crypts again? Wouldn't that be great? But yeah, I was
Well,
going
I
with
think
that
just
somewhere.
piggybacking on that, Ethan, the
Yeah.
idea to me, and you tell me if this is right, but how I read the Sometimes Kingdom is instead of a world like, say, Stillfleet, or maybe even Danse Macabre in a very different way, where humans get stuck in these cycles based on their beliefs about the good. It's almost like the beliefs themselves have gotten stuck, and then they're confronted by the fact that humans are moving on. So there's this kind of inversion. There's this portal relationship between Earth where people are dreaming up these beings, and then the place where the beings seem to reside, but for them that is reality, and Earth is this kind of shadow that is less interesting and not real in a sense. It's not normal. It's like they both are emburdened by the other, like the other is changing faster or has different properties, and I think there's something really interesting again about the idea that like they used to be one way and now it's becoming different, and that is in part due to what humans are doing, in the same way that like that humans always like give rise to new stories. What if those stories had to sort of deal with that in a meaningful sense? But hey, they had magic, so like in theory, well, they could, to your point, they could just wish everything away.
Yeah.
But that isn't
And
really like that
well,
isn't really
if
how
we
magic works. Magic always has a
well,
price.
it's magic always has a price, and it's the same sort of like I'm trying to. I think like not that I'm saying that magic is the economy and vice versa, but it's like if we just rationally organized our economy, every single person on Earth would be fed, clothed, and lived until their 80s. Like
What?
what? We wouldn't be
You heard it
pumping
here
energy into
first,
the
folks.
atmosphere.
Yeah, no one has ever said
Um,
that before.
In fact, instead of being communists, I think we should be wizards. That is the
I think we should
new
honestly, we
thing.
should just solve the problem. So
That
it's
might
sort
be
of
the
this
only
idea,
way we
like
can defeat the billionaires. Anyway.
yeah, I think ultimately like there are questions arising like lore wise or in game. It's our like players have already started discussing it like in character of sort of like why don't we just feed ourselves and live forever? We could do that if we tried really hard. And it's like they know they have jobs, they have cities, they like life is workaday in a way that maybe it shouldn't be if you can move the moon. But that's the way that power operates. And so it's sort of trying to contend with what that means. Hopefully will become like part of people's like larger plots because it's an interesting thing to talk about in character and out of character. And I feel like eventually like arcs are going to go to really, really weird places. I think it would be cool to start talking about the other islands that are out there. Because Season's Keep is one part of this like big ass archipelago. It's huge. But like even in the immediate region, they call themselves Seasons Keep, and there is this sort of like, I don't think they've necessarily risen to the atrocities of colonialism necessarily, but it's like if there are smaller isles that are like right by them, or like oh that's the periphery, yeah, they're part of spring, or they don't want to be part of the spring. If they're part of summer, they don't want to be. Like the stuff that's happening underground. There's two continents that are slightly overlapping. What about the space in between it? The frontier is that which is, I think, ultimately inhospitable to human folk, who seem to be, the squishy people who die really easily. Humans are described in the book as hale and hearty and full of spite and viscera, which seem to just sort of like cover it, as if you were writing about humans and you only had like 10 words, and you're another species that lived for hundreds of years. That's probably how you describe them. But they're interesting. They've invented something called an economy. They make really cool shit. If they try and like be as bad as they are on Earth, we're going to stop them very brutally. So at this point, like all of the major armistices between the species have happened a long time ago. And that's partly like in terms of like the safety of a game. I would say that like I don't necessarily want it to be cozy, but I don't want it to be about atrocities. And Earth's history is made of atrocities. It is fully composed of atrocities up until and including this very day.
I mean, that's something that we definitely considered, and me personally kind of struggled with Danse Macabre. Is like, well, I mean, you can't like look away or not acknowledge the actual history, the actual events, the pogroms, the crusades, like all of the things that have happened. But you have to finesse it in a way so that you do have that bit of buffer, and then like open the door to allow people to kind of explore that on their own.
Right. Yeah. And I think that there's plenty of room, I think, for if players do want to broach it. Earth is right there. I think that people who wind up trapped, you can travel to it. Through a portal. It's right there. You've got the armoire. You walk through it, like you do some non-Euclidean math, and you're there. Like you go to the cursed subway platform in winter, and you're suddenly in Hong Kong. There's plenty. Like I think that like it's important to make sure that it's like not an impossibility to discuss it or to have it be part of gameplay. But in crafting to the point of like it being whimsy and it's a dangerous, snippy world, wanting to make a world that is queer because of that destabilization, and that is tolerant of all peoples, but is not necessarily cozy in the sense that there's still struggles. There have been wars. The main tension in the game is between the seasons, which is a truly like it's a very Swiftian kind of flourish. At least I hope, in the sense that it doesn't make any sense. Like what season you're from? Like seasons are supposed to be like the time seasons, like the idea of the seasons, like they're called that, like it doesn't even make sense in their world anymore. Seasons were called seasons because of like how they were oriented around harvest time. That's why we have them. That's why they're delineated. And now they've oriented themselves around the weather, basically, or the idea of the seasons. But like everything is planted in like, spring and summer and autumn. So it doesn't even matter anymore. Like that sort of idea of these weird legacy tensions in culture like are absurd, and maybe they rise to the level of like genuine social tensions or wars or battles. But if we really want to discuss like the awfulness of atrocity and colonialism, this is not a world that had empires. So Earth is right there to talk about it.
Yeah, I think in that sense it's similar to Danse Macabre, because Danse Macabre temporally exists kind of before the imperial phase of capitalism, before capitalism. Sunrise Kingdom, while it may be somehow temporally coterminous with the 70s, 80s, it's like clearly not about the real world in that way. It's about some aspects of it, but not others, and it has this kind of inverse relationship. And then I would even say like PICARO, is about challenging that and saying, okay, well, what if there's never like at least plantation slavery level post-feudal, like early modern empire, because of magic, and enough magic is out there that destabilizes some of those imperial ambitions. And so who knows what happens after that. So I think it's interesting. A lot of all three of us actually on the call have kind of tried to create fantasy situations where you can have real horrible, brutal things to respond to as a player and a GM and explore the stories, but also we're trying to hedge against anyone accidentally doing a colonialism in the game.
doing a colonialism, doing a racism, doing a genocide.
And the reason the Defenders of the Realm exist are specifically to make sure that no one is like rules-wise capable of doing a genocide. Maybe that's a little too pinballing on the rails. Maybe that's a little too ridiculous. But
I don't think that's too on the rails.
It's also trying to explain, I think, at least in world a little bit, why it hasn't happened. And of course, there's the potential for a handful of powerful mages to become deeply corrupt, and they have in the past, and they were killed by angry mobs. So the whole system sort of like is like in this weird kind of like, mutual enmity and syzygy in a way that like it holds together in a way that hopefully seems logical of why these things didn't happen. So it's not just hand waving it away and being like it's a world of happiness and whimsy.
No, yeah.
Like, you know.
So to that point, Ethan, I'm wondering if you can, because we're going to run out of time at some point. I feel like we could just talk all night about like fun, cool possibility. I think it'd be interesting and instructive to talk a little about the AP that's coming up and maybe tease kind of the plot, because we have a 2-part AP, and then so an actual play featuring I'll be playing almost surely some kind of talking animal if allowed. Ethan Gouldini will be GMing, and then we actually have 3 guest actors who are amazing. And I will say I think. We'll all be there at least on the 19th. It's possible one of the guest actors is not going to be around on the 12th, but we're gonna have a great time anyway. And I think this is going to be a fun exploration with, folks we respect and know their work a bit, but really people who were entrusting to kind of help bring to light this game, which we have played a bit. We've done our own kind of in-house AP with our friends, which is always super fun. But I am looking forward, Ethan, to this special 2-parter with sort of pro actual play folks, and then maybe. So let's tackle that, and then at some point let's come back to kind of what's next for Sometimes Kingdom, and again thinking through this lens of just where you're leaving off with, okay, what are the stories you want to tell? What are the big high level themes you want to explore? But first, why don't we tease what people can expect this weekend?
I'm really excited about it. It's going to be a 2-parter set in spring. It's going to be set in Springside. I think it's going to be our first AP in quite some time, taking place on that island. You're going to be members of the Questing Network, the only members left standing after a total party knockout of a large group of knights and defenders of a city, the city of Brocadia. You'll be in the beginning sort of racing after some sort of large artifice. All I can say about it is it's sort of I guess what would be it would be the Baba Yaga meets Fast and Furious. It's going to be the first episode. That's self-explanatory, right? Totally.
Yeah. Is it going to be people racing in chicken leg huts? Because sign me up. Man. I'm here for it.
It's the rules of the road in fantasy. All the things we've talked about are going to come to a head by the end of the first episode about what are the laws around doing a fantasy in a crowded society, what are people's responsibilities and what does property mean in a world like that. But also it's going to be a really exciting race.
And who gets to use what kind of magic, and whoops, oh my god, there's like a 50-foot tall chicken leg house running through the forest. So I think it'll be fun to see how you tackle La Familia, how you tackle action movie tropes with the high magic. I have no idea. I know we talked a little about just the sort of theme or the sort of Hollywood trailer version of this AP, but it's 2 parts only, so it's this Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And then the next Sunday, the World Cup final, after the World Cup final at 6 p.m.
After the World Cup final. Your celebratory, yeah.
And of course, we'll have it on YouTube. But we'd love if folks wanted to tune in. So if you are listening to this live, or depending on when this episode comes out, pretty soon, we want people to check out the AP and maybe talk to us in the chat and influence the story. And yeah, we're very excited. I should also say who the actors are. We have Rachel Cordell, whom we've been lucky enough to do AP with before, including for Danse Macabre, Nihara Nichelle, and Apollo Pierce. And we're very excited to have basically real actors, real AP folks get their whole their hands on the game. So I don't know what's going to happen. I hope to be a talking animal because I love pretending to be animals.
Have you decided what species you're going to be yet, or what species of talking animal?
I am waiting to see what the other players do. I'm going to do whatever they're not doing, so that I've played the game before.
Yeah, I think it's trying to take advantage of the fact that there are a handful of cars in the world, and as a Questing Network member, you can become a driver and be authorized to drive a car, which is alive. With that fracas is how this whole thing is going to start. Who knows if that will continue or the players will find some other vehicular means to do what they need to do to Baba that Yaga. Yeah.
Baba that Yaga. That would be. Yaga. I'm glad that's Yaga, not the name of the quest, but it should be.
Baba that Yaga, the Duke Nukem
story.
Yeah, exactly. Groovy.
Ethan, as that follow-up, can you extend, feel free to say more about the AP, but can you also tell us kind of what's next for the Sometimes Kingdom as a series of printed objects and really just in terms of game development? So we had sort of initial rules we were playtesting. Big thanks to everybody like Taylor and others who've played the game. And of course, a big shout out to our sort of OG ongoing playtesters, so Erica, Ben, and Jeff, who are just lovely folks and always fun to play with. Now we have this first printed rule zine, which you can actually finally, you can order from our website and anywhere by the time you're listening to this, and it'll get delivered to you by Studio 2. But we're already working on another zine, which will probably be shorter, but basically going to do, spring, summer, etc. in that order. And maybe some weird, we talked about doing sort of like inspired by Kalamata, like art zines, Ethan, or just things you want to do. So can you tell us what you're working on and how you see the project going? And again, I'm just thinking of those big themes, like what is this game going to feel like for players who are sort of familiar with D&D, probably familiar with cozy fantasy, Hogwarts, whatever. What is the season's key?
So I feel like the next one I'm excited about working on is the island of Springside. So it will be the spring zine. It may not come out in spring, but it will be about spring. The spring is the most, in quotes, fairy tale land of them all, because it has the most sort of vitalism magic inherent to it. So things have a habit of coming alive, sometimes in horrifying fashion, sometimes in delightful fashion, sometimes in politically really fraught fashion, and then they go join a bunch of royalists who are Regency furniture, who knows. It's going to definitely focus, I think, on the major cities of the island, and then of course the sort of like the very strange ecology of a wet, weatherly world that is forever spring, and kind of dig a little bit into like, what does that mean? What does that mean for fashion? Like, if you go to a place, like how do you speak? Like, what is the language a little bit like? I'm sort of like little tiny like bits and bobs of like mechanicalized things for the game that try to get into, I think, some of the stuff that games don't necessarily get into. Not necessarily anthropological, but a little bit more a little bit travel guide, just sort of imagining that you haven't been to that place before.
Right.
So I'm excited about that. In terms of other stuff that's sort of even beyond that, I've been going through like a lot of my drawings. I guess it's ecology again. I have so many botanical drawings, and it's sort of, you can really see like where I've doggedly learned like the parts of mushrooms, or like this is how like tendrils on a plant work. You can sort of see the point where I hit boredom and it just becomes something maniacal that has no reference in the real world whatsoever. So I'd love to sort of start gathering all of that stuff together, and maybe it's sort of like a very brief zine of an ecologist who's somewhere, and then they're just out of their depth, or they are, trying to create their ecological report while running away from the forest itself.
Yeah, they end up crossing over into some other fantasy setting. Chris, there is a question in the chat we have.
There is a question in the chat from our good friend Vex. A question about setting: is spring the horniest kingdom?
Very good question. I would now, lore-wise, it really depends on what your definition of horniness is. I feel like, in terms of courtship rituals, it probably is in some ways the most traditional. You're expected to give a token of love, because of the tradition of knighthood that's present in it. There are definitely like these sort of, I feel like they are definitely addicted to yearning as an erotic concept in ways that the other islands find exhausting. And I would say that like sexually, they're probably the most frank and normal, like in terms of just do what you want, we don't care. Like we're basically like communists and anarchists. We don't give a shit. We're a bunch of fishermen villages. You get a place like Winter, which is, I think, definitely to a certain extent in terms of fashion and the way they operate, way lustier and hornier, but their dating is much more rigid and formal. And you've got to like run it by all the aunties. You've got to like sort of get the family and clan approval before you do stuff.
It's all bones on Winter too. I mean, like they're going to be more rigid, I would think.
Gonna be there. You did it. They're gonna freeze you out so easily. They get so frigid so quickly if you do things wrong. Never ends. Never ends.
That's good.
Learn about
by the next you out.
By the next spring zine, learn about sex and romance in the fantasy world.
Yeah, I think Vex points out that handing your kerchief to a maiden type location, but 90% skeletons. So
yeah, it's difficult. You got to really work really hard to find the right one. Skeletons don't date. It's a real roulette game.
Famously asexual skeletons.
I mean, dating has meant many things in many different locations. Again, without making this always about speculative anthropology, it's kind of always about speculative anthropology, which can be the anthropology of love and coupling, and just friendship and friends having. On that cheery note, we're about out of time. Vex only hands their handkerchief to skeletons. Quite true. We all know this about
famously, yes.
It's true. It's true.
Famous game design homie. Ethan, anything else you want to shout out, or anything we didn't get to in terms of your work? The intersection of art and game design, just stuff you're excited about, and also just having a first print product that is not. I mean, you've worked obviously on everything from the big ass core rulebook to Danse Macabre, but for your basically a game that is really your game. I mean, I'm listed there because I think I've helped you with some of the words choosing, the numbers choosing for grit rules and whatnot. But it's very much your game, and I'm curious just if you have any reflections or thoughts, anything you wanted to cover.
I'm very excited about it. I feel like, I'm not sure if this will be true for every game that I develop, but I feel like it was really important to me that this one developed organically. I feel like that's obviously like a much longer process. But I feel like that sort of like organic process, just because of by virtue of what the world is, like I want to sort of see where it would shake out. In Skier and in this, there's a couple of drawings here and there which are quite old from mine. I've sort of obsessively archived stuff that I've done. I'm a little bit hypergraphic, so I am constantly always drawing, and the amount of stuff that I have is stupefying. So at some point I managed to scan a good chunk of it, and it really is pleasing to see stuff that used to just be squirreled away in my notebook, like shared with as many people as will, read it and play it and purchase it. So I'm hoping for more of that, but I feel like now I've also at a point where I'm excited to have that be a jumping off point for a totally new art. I think that there's like a lot of really interesting places to go stylistically, between the sort of like painterly fun characterization that's already happened in the first book and the sort of like the very cool sketchy drawings that are in it. I feel like there's like a space in between or beyond that I'd like the art to go, and I'm sort of excited to see where that goes.
Sweet.
Cool.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we're all excited to see where that goes for sure. And yeah, I mean, I love the idea of expanding it out beyond just having rules text and like, again, the Moncow kind of approach of having art books and illustrative projects that kind of intersect and build out the lore and the diegesis without it having to necessarily be textual, which is really fun.
Absolutely.
I'm stoked about it.
And I love building on rules like the spell words, which was, I think, one of the earlier on new additions to the grit system that felt totally new and just really not, tied to Stillfleet, which I think was good because, a lot of the initial work we were doing around these games was there's something there with Stillfleet, but what about other settings? Hey, I want to do this. And that I think does work to a degree. We've obviously made the SRD now, but it's been a long process for me. And I think part of that, Ethan, has been working with you on various aspects of game design that are, hey, I want this to feel different. I have a thought. And I think the magic system was one where, we took our time and allowed it to kind of get to a point where now I think it's pretty easy to implement, and I think it'll be fun to see kind of maybe other versions beyond what's in this book, which works just fine. But maybe there's islands where just the list of words is different, and that makes magic feel different because totally tying it to words and wordplay, but keeping the rules very simple in terms of like burning grid and the effect is I think a formula that is reproducible, and again, that's from a game design standpoint. I'm excited about that, in addition to, of course, just more art and taking your lore and maybe working with you on that, kind of taking cool ideas and saying, okay, let's turn this into essentially, I'm thinking of advice from like Merc Dice and other OSR blog people, like turning into chunks, right? Making things toyetic, like making everything a page where like, I know what's on this page. It's useful immediately to different players and GMs, and it's fun, of course. So with that, unless either y'all have some last words, I think it's about time to wrap this one up and just tell people,
it is.
Go get the fucking book. Go
works for me. Definitely.
Go get the book.
Get the book. Get the Sometimes Kingdom Monsoon zine out now from Stillfleet Studio. Get it, play it, buy it. You're gonna love it. You'll become obsessed with it.
We have fun. This is fun.
Buy the fucking book.
Well, on that note, where can folks go to purchase this fine document? And then, tacked onto that as well, Ethan, where can folks find you online? What are your pluggables? How can we best support you as a person, not just a brilliant games writer?
not just a person, but as a content creator, making slick. God, no. Yeah. I can be found mostly on Instagram and Blue Sky. I am a Spectral House across all social media. There is a possible Patreon in the works that will mostly be free because there's a whole lot of stuff outside the purview of even games that I think would be fun to start sharing. I think the best thing about working on this game is I've sort of started opening up, I think, a lot of stuff that has been outside of my art practice professionally. I've started being a little bit less private with some of my own private art practice, and I'm kind of excited to start sharing that too. So yeah, I can be found at Spectral House wherever good internets are sold. Yeah, and you can purchase this book at stillfleet.com.
It's true.
Yeah. Awesome. Get the book. You'll give your kerchief to it. You'll court it dutifully, says Vex. As ever, thanks so much, Ethan, for joining us. Thanks a lot for being a multi-time guest on Why We Roll and sharing your very funny insights and your art, even though it's a podcast. If you're listening to the podcast, imagine the art. It's really cool. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Vex and Taylor in the chat and Justin. And we will be back with more Why We Roll very soon because we just can't help ourselves.
We just can't stop.
Addicted to casting.
Yeah, we're
this
just
door never
addicted
closes.
to talking on the internet, baby.
Tune in Sunday. Ethan will be GMing Fast and the Furious with Baba Yaga because, of course, those genres just it's such a good combo.
Molto bene. Well, thanks so much for having me.
Of course, anytime. All right. Well, this has been another episode of Why We Roll. Thanks everybody for listening. Wait, Wythe, you already did this. Okay, we're gonna just exit now.
I'm just clicking the button. Bye.
Okay, bye.